Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something huge, the complex and, often brutal system of transatlantic trade that really shaped the world we live in today.
So let's kick things off with a big question that really gets to the heart of it all. How on earth did things like sugar and tobacco build a massive empire and, at the exact same time, just shatter entire continents?
Okay, to even begin to answer that, we've got to wrap our heads around this whole new global system that popped up, connecting everything across the Atlantic.
And, it's so important to get this right from the start. This wasn't just about goods. Yeah, you had raw materials going one way, manufactured products the other, but the whole thing, the entire system, was tragically built on moving human beings, people. Enslaved Africans and American Indians were treated like cargo, and that dehumanizing fact is at the absolute center of this whole economy.
Right, so you can see the flow here. Europe sending out finished goods, and what's coming back? All the stuff Europe was desperate for: sugar, tobacco, timber from the Americas. But what was the fuel for this whole engine? Well, it was the forced labor of enslaved people shipped across the Atlantic. Now, for the people who were already living in the Americas, the indigenous communities, this new interconnected world was nothing short of a catastrophe. An absolute disaster. The diseases Europeans brought with them were devastating. The people there had no immunity, leading to population collapses. I'm talking up to 90% in some places. 90. That's just unimaginable. And it wasn't just the loss of life. It completely destabilized their entire societies. So this huge disruption really set the stage for how the whole system worked. You might be asking, okay, so what was the structure? What was the engine driving it all? Well, it was the infamous triangular trade. And it was this grim three-part cycle, all designed for one thing: maximum profit. So step one, a ship leaves, say, New England, loaded with something like rum. It sails to West Africa, where that rum is traded for enslaved people. Step two, those people are then forced onto ships for the horrific journey across the Atlantic, the Middle Passage. And step three, the people who survived that ordeal were then exchanged in the Americas for goods like sugar. That sugar was then brought back to New England, turned into more rum, and, the whole brutal cycle started all over again. And that second leg of the trip, the Middle Passage, it was just a scene of pure horror. The quote here really only scratches the surface. We're talking about conditions that were incredibly brutal. Inhumane overcrowding, disease spreading like wildfire, constant violence. Just unimaginable suffering packed onto those ships for months. Okay, so you have to wonder, what was the big idea behind all this? What was the philosophy driving it? To get that, we need to zoom out a bit and talk about the dominant economic theory back then, which was called mercantilism. So, mercantilism, at its heart, was based on one really simple idea. The theory was that a country's power came straight from its wealth. And that wealth, which they measured mostly in gold and silver, was limited. There was only so much to go around. Think of it like this. They saw the world's wealth as a fixed pie. And if the pie isn't getting any bigger, how do you get more powerful? Well, you have to get a bigger slice. And that means someone else's slice has to get smaller. This idea right here is what fueled all that insane competition between empires. So the question becomes, how do you get the biggest slice of that pie? The main strategy was something called a favorable balance of trade. And the goal was super simple, as you can see here. You want to export way more than you import. It's common sense, right? When you sell stuff to other countries, their gold and silver flows into you. But when you buy their stuff, your gold and silver flows out. And this is why colonies were so crucial to the whole mercantilist plan. They were a two-for-one deal. First, they gave the mother country a cheap, steady supply of raw materials: sugar, timber, you name it. And second, those same colonies were then forced to buy the finished goods made back in the mother country. It created this perfect closed economic loop where all the profits stayed within the empire. Of course, to make all this stick, Britain had to enforce it, and they did that with laws called the Navigation Acts. These were pretty strict. For one, all trade had to be done on English ships with English crews. That kept all the shipping profits in-house. Then they made a list of what they called enumerated goods, basically the most valuable stuff like sugar and tobacco, and said those had to go to England first before they could go anywhere else. Why? So England could tax them, of course. And you can probably guess this level of control did not go over well in the colonies. It became a huge point of friction. All right, so we've seen how this powerful economic engine worked. But it didn't just make empires rich. It completely changed the social fabric of society, especially over in the Americas.
And all that money, all those enormous profits, they weren't spread around evenly, not at all. The wealth was super concentrated. It created this whole new powerful class of people, wealthy colonial merchants, investors, big plantation owners. Their power wasn't based on old family names, it was based on commerce. And this new elite really took root in the booming seaport cities like Boston, New York, and Charleston.
And with all this new wealth floating around, plus a ton more goods available, something totally new started to happen. Historians call it the consumer revolution. All of a sudden, it became a really big deal to own things you didn't strictly need to survive. Things like fancy imported fabrics, nice china, tea sets, that kind of stuff. And this points to a massive social shift. Think about it. Before, your status was all about your family, your lineage, who your parents were. But now, with all this new money, status became something you could show off. It started to be less about who you were born as, and a whole lot more about what you could afford to buy and display.
Okay, so let's pull all of this together. Let's talk about the long shadow this period cast, the echoes that we can still feel today.
When you look at it, the whole era is just full of these deep contradictions. On one hand, the Atlantic economy created staggering wealth. It fueled the growth of empires. But on the other hand, it was built on the absolute unimaginable suffering of millions of people. It completely rewired societies on 3 different continents, and it laid the foundation for economic systems and social hierarchies that, frankly, are still with us today.
And that really leaves us with a final, pretty heavy question to think about. People say the past is the past, but it's rarely that simple. So the question is, how do these historical structures, this wealth and this inequality, all built on a foundation of exploitation, how do they still shape the world you and I are living in right now?